My name is Margaret Hale. I'm 76 years old, a retired schoolteacher, a widow of 22 years, and a mother to two grown sons, Daniel and Christopher. For most of my life, my joy came from simple things, baking cinnamon rolls on Sundays, knitting by the fireplace, and listening to the hum of the rain against the roof while my boys played in the living room. I never cared for the flashy life. My husband, God rest his soul, used to say, "Maggie, money is like a garden. Tend it quietly, and one day it will surprise you."
I did just that.
Quietly, carefully, and without a single boast to my children, I tended my own little financial garden. They never knew that years ago, when our small town's paper mill went public, I bought a stack of shares for pennies. They were just a keepsake for my husband's work bonus back then, nothing more. Over the decades, the company grew, merged, split, and adapted. But I held on, not because I expected riches, but because it reminded me of my husband's belief in patience. The truth is, I never told Daniel and Christopher that those shares had grown into something substantial. And when a massive merger was announced last winter, those shares suddenly became worth $100 million. $100 million. I stared at the number in disbelief the day I got the letter from my broker. My hands trembled so hard, I had to set down my tea. But that's when an old, gnawing ache in my heart returned, the one that had been there since my husband's funeral. I couldn't help but remember how Daniel and Christopher had treated me over the years. After their father died, they visited less, called only when they needed something, and often found excuses not to spend the holidays with me. Birthdays became afterthoughts. Sometimes, I'd go months without hearing their voices. So, I made a choice. I told them nothing about the merger. In fact, I went one step further. When they asked about my finances, I sighed and told them my shares were barely worth a few $100s. I said I'd probably sell them soon just to pay my heating bill. I wanted to see, would they care for me when they thought I had nothing? Would they call? Would they come? For the next 6 months, I lived as plainly as ever. I wore my same old cardigans, drove my battered 1999 Toyota, and kept my cozy, creaky house exactly as it had been for decades. I didn't buy anything new. I even let the curtains fade in the sun just to make the picture believable. The calls from my sons were few. The visits? Non-existent. Until the day after the news broke publicly about the merger. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Daniel's number. Then Christopher's. Then Daniel again. Then Christopher again. After years of silence, suddenly, they remembered me. I could almost feel the hunger through the phone line. I didn't pick up.
I wanted to.
God, I wanted to. My chest ached hearing my sons' voices on the voicemail, except they weren't calling to say, "I miss you," or "I love you." They were frantic, loud, and strangely formal. Christopher's message was, "Mom, I heard about your stocks.
We need to talk right now.
Call me back. This is urgent." Daniel's was worse. "Why didn't you tell us? Do not make any financial moves until we speak. We need to manage this together." Not one mention of my health. Not one question about whether I was eating well, or sleeping, or happy. Just money. That night, I sat in my living room with a lamp casting a golden pool of light over my knitting. I stared at the phone in my lap as it rang again. And again. And again. Finally, I answered. My voice was calm. "Hello, Daniel." He didn't say hello back. "Mom, I've been calling you all day.
We need to meet. Now."
This is serious. I took a slow breath. "Why, Daniel? You haven't called me in almost a year. Why now?" He hesitated. "That's not important. This is about the shares. Do you have any idea?" I cut him off. "Yes. I know exactly what they're worth." The silence that followed was ice cold. And that's when I said it, the sentence that would change everything between us, forever. "Daniel, I don't think you care about me. I think you care about the money. And I'm about to prove it." His voice rose instantly. "Mom, don't do something you'll regret." I hung up. My hands were steady now. My decision was made. But what I did the next morning would make sure they learned exactly what kind of woman their mother really was. Long before the word merger meant anything to me, my life revolved around two little boys with messy hair and scraped knees. Daniel came first, with eyes as blue as a summer sky and a stubborn streak that made him argue about bedtime from the age of 3. Christopher followed 2 years later, quieter and more thoughtful, always watching before he acted. When their father, Thomas, was alive, our home was a place of warmth and noise. He worked at the paper mill, putting in long hours but always making sure he was home for dinner. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and somehow, Thomas always found a way to make the boys feel like princes, even if it meant he wore his work boots until they split at the seams. Then came the winter of 2001. Thomas's heart gave out while shoveling snow from the driveway. I can still see the way the snowflakes settled on his hair as he lay there, the steam of his breath fading into the cold air. In that moment, the world became unbearably quiet. I was 48, widowed, and staring at a future that looked like a cliff edge. From that day on, I worked 2 jobs, teaching during the day and working evenings at a local diner, to keep the boys in school, clothes on their backs, and food on the table. I packed lunches with peanut butter sandwiches when I couldn't afford deli meat. I walked to save gas. And I never complained, not once, because I didn't want my sons to feel like they were a burden. The paper mill, in an act of kindness, gave me a small bonus from Thomas's years of service. Most widows would have used it to pay down bills. I put it into shares of the company just to keep a little piece of him with me. Back then, they were worth almost nothing. It was a sentimental choice, not a strategic one. But over the years, through layoffs, expansions, and shifts in the market, those shares kept growing quietly in the background while I focused on raising my sons. Daniel and Christopher never knew about them. In fact, they rarely asked about anything to do with money, at least when they were younger. All they saw was that no matter how hard times got, they always had what they needed.
And that was enough for me.
But as the boys grew older, something began to change. Daniel, who once sat at the kitchen table telling me all about his dreams of being a pilot, became more focused on impressing people. He cared about clothes, cars, and later, expensive vacations he couldn't quite afford. Christopher, the quiet one, started making choices that seemed more calculated. He married young, but the marriage didn't last, and each time he landed in trouble, it was my phone that rang. At first, I was proud they still came to me when they needed help. It meant I was still their safe place. But over time, I realized the calls came only when they were in trouble, never when they were happy. They never just called to tell me about their day. I remember one Christmas in particular, maybe 10 years ago. I had saved for months to buy Daniel a watch he'd been eyeing and Christopher a set of custom tools for his garage. When they unwrapped them, they smiled, said thank you, and then immediately went back to their phones. There was no spark in their eyes, no shared laughter. It was as if the gifts were just expected. The distance grew, year by year. I still invited them for Sunday dinners, but often they'd cancel last minute. Sometimes they wouldn't even call. I'd just sit there, the roast chicken growing cold, the candles burning low. I told myself it was just the way of modern families, everyone busy, everyone tired. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was no longer their priority. When the merger news came, I sat alone in my living room, reading the letter from my broker over and over. The number on the page seemed unreal. But more than the money, it was the realization that I finally had a chance to see the truth. Would my sons still love me if they thought I had nothing? I decided to find out. For months after, I downplayed everything. I made comments about rising bills, about how the old shares were probably worthless. I let the paint peel on the porch rail. I even sold my newer TV and brought back the old boxy one from the attic. It worked. They barely noticed me. Birthdays passed with only a short text or a late-night call that sounded more like a duty than love. And then, when the news broke publicly, the transformation in their voices was immediate. Greedy, sharp, possessive. That night, after I hung up on Daniel, I couldn't sleep. I thought about the years I'd spent sacrificing for them. The cold winters, I spent grading papers with my hands aching from the diner shift. The nights I sat awake, worrying about their futures. And I realized they had no idea who I really was anymore. The next morning, I decided to make my move. I called my lawyer, and what we set in motion would change my family forever. The morning I walked into my lawyer's office, the sky was still gray, with the last breath of winter. I had been with Peter Carlisle for over 30 years. He handled the will after Thomas died, helped me with a house deed, and, most importantly, never once betrayed my trust. He was a man who valued privacy, the kind who still wrote things down on yellow legal pads instead of trusting computers. When I stepped into his wood-paneled office, Peter stood up immediately. "Margaret," he said warmly, "you look well, and from the sound of your message, you've had quite a windfall." I sat down, smoothing the front of my cardigan. "Peter, I don't need a windfall. I've been fine for years. But I do need a plan, and not the kind you might expect." He leaned forward, his pen poised. "Go on." I told him everything. The way my sons had drifted from me, the coldness in their voices, the silence that lasted for months until the moment they learned about the merger. Then the sudden urgency, not to see me, not to check on me, but to control the money. "I want to know," I said, my voice steady, "who they are without the temptation. I want to see if either of them cares about me as their mother and not as their bank account." Peter tilted his head, studying me. "And how do you intend to do that?" I smiled faintly. "By letting them believe the money is already gone." He set his pen down. "That's a dangerous game, Margaret. You might burn bridges you can't rebuild." "Peter," I said, "those bridges were burning long before this. I just didn't want to admit it." For the next hour, we crafted a plan. We would move the shares into a trust under a separate holding name. On paper, it would appear as though I had liquidated the assets at a fraction of their value, a believable mistake for an elderly woman without proper financial guidance. Meanwhile, the actual fortune would remain untouchable, protected until I decided who truly deserved it. Peter looked me in the eye before I left. "Margaret, this will bring out the truth. But you need to be ready for what you might hear or not hear from your sons." I was ready, or so I thought. The very next day, the calls started again. Daniel tried a softer approach this time. "Mom, I'm sorry if I sounded pushy yesterday. I just want to make sure you're okay." But when I told him casually, "Oh, I sold the shares last week, got a decent amount, maybe enough to fix the roof," the silence on the other end was telling. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't ask why I sold them. He just said, "Oh," followed by a quick, "Well, I have to go. Talk soon." Christopher's reaction was sharper. "What do you mean you sold them? For how much?" I gave him a vague figure, a tiny fraction of the real value. "It's fine, Chris. I've got enough for my needs." There was a pause, then a muttered curse. "Mom, that was stupid. You should have called me first. I could have handled it." Handled it. That was the phrase that made my stomach turn. My sons weren't thinking about me. They were thinking about what they could have handled for themselves. For the next 2 weeks, neither of them called. Not once. Then came the invitation. Daniel left a voicemail saying he wanted to have dinner, as a family, at his house on Sunday. The sudden change in tone was so obvious, I could almost hear the unspoken motive. I accepted, curious to see what they would try next. When I arrived at Daniel's home, a large, sleek place with glass walls and a driveway big enough for 3 cars, I could feel the tension before I even stepped through the door. Both Daniel and Christopher were there, sitting in the living room like they'd been rehearsing something. Daniel smiled thinly. "Mom, it's good to see you." Christopher didn't bother smiling. "We just wanted to talk." I sat down in the armchair opposite them. "About what?" Daniel glanced at Christopher, then back at me. "About your future. We think it's time you considered moving into something more manageable." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Christopher leaned forward. "Like selling the house. We could put the money into an account we manage for you. You'd be comfortable, safe. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I kept my expression calm, but inside, my heart was hammering. This was it, the moment I would see just how far they'd go when they thought my wealth was gone. "I appreciate the concern," I said slowly. But I like my home. Christopher's jaw tightened. Mom, it's not just about what you like. You need to be practical. Daniel nodded. We'll make the arrangements. It's for your own good. I looked from one son to the other, feeling something inside me go cold. They weren't asking. They were telling me. That night, as I drove home in the dark, I knew the next step in my plan would have to be bigger and riskier. Because if they thought they could control my life now, they had no idea what I was about to do next. The night after that dinner at Daniel's house, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in my armchair with the clock ticking on the wall, every second hammering in my ears. Their words kept replaying. It's for your own good. We'll make the arrangements. You need to be practical. Practical. That word had been used against me before. Years ago, when I insisted on paying for Daniel's final semester of college after his scholarship fell through, my sister had called me foolishly sentimental instead of practical. When Christopher's marriage collapsed and I took him in for 6 months rent-free, a neighbor told me I was being taken advantage of instead of practical. And maybe they had been right all along.
But now?
This was different. This wasn't about helping them. This was about them deciding what to do with me, my home, my life, my choices, because they thought I was too old, too naive, too broke to matter. I called Peter first thing in the morning. It's time, I told him. He didn't need me to explain. You're sure? Absolutely. Let's go all the way. For the next week, I orchestrated a performance worthy of an Oscar. I called Daniel and Christopher separately and told them my bills were piling up. I hinted that I might not be able to afford my property taxes. I even mentioned, with a shaky laugh, that I'd been browsing assisted living brochures just in case. They didn't offer to help with the taxes. They didn't offer to fix the house. But they did offer one thing. If you sell, Mom, we'll make sure you're taken care of. I agreed. That's how, 2 weeks later, both of my sons stood in my living room, smiling like realtors who'd just closed the deal of their lives. They'd already spoken to an agent. They already had buyers interested. The papers were neatly stacked on my coffee table. I acted hesitant, wringing my hands, pacing, biting my lip, but in the end, I signed. What they didn't know was that the deed they had just convinced me to sell wasn't the real deed at all. Peter had drawn up a legal transfer to an LLC I controlled entirely. On paper, it looked like I had sold my home to a third party for far below market value. In reality, that buyer was me. My home was still mine, my fortune was still intact, and my sons had no idea they were playing a part in their own test. When Daniel took the fake paperwork, he said, "See, Mom? This is for the best. You'll thank us later." Christopher patted my shoulder. "We'll handle everything from here." I smiled at them the way only a mother can, soft on the outside, steel on the inside. Over the next month, I played the role of the downsizing elderly woman perfectly. I boxed up old dishes, let the lawn grow a little too long, and dropped comments about moving to a small rental on the edge of town. I even told the neighbors that my sons had stepped in to help because I couldn't manage on my own. And then I waited. The first crack came one Saturday afternoon when Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. He walked through the door like he owned the place, and maybe in his mind he did. "Mom, I was thinking once you move out, I might renovate. Knock down that wall, maybe turn the place into an Airbnb. Easy money." I kept my face calm, but inside I was taking notes. Christopher, on the other hand, had already begun hinting at borrowing from the supposed house sale funds for an investment opportunity. Every word they spoke confirmed it. They didn't see me as a mother. They saw me as a stepping stone. Peter called one evening after I'd filled him in on their behavior. "Are you ready for the final phase?" he asked. I looked out the window at the sunset, painting the sky in gold and fire. "Not yet. I want them to believe they've won. I want them to get comfortable." So I gave them just enough rope. I told Daniel I was looking forward to seeing what he'd do with his new property. I told Christopher I'd think about lending him some money once the sale funds cleared. I let them both believe they were in control. But all the while, the real documents sat in Peter's office safe. The shares, the trust, the deed, every single thing I owned was still mine. And when I finally decided to reveal the truth, It wouldn't just shock them. It would make them wish they had never, ever underestimated their mother. By the time spring rolled around, Daniel and Christopher were acting like they'd already inherited me. Daniel stopped knocking when he came over. He'd stride in with his sunglasses still on, toss his keys on the counter, and start talking about future plans for the house, which, in his mind, already belonged to him. Christopher was subtler, but not by much. He called almost every other day, not to ask how I was feeling, but to update me on business opportunities he thought we could work on together. Those opportunities always seemed to involve him getting a large sum of money from me. Fast. It was almost funny, because what they didn't know was that every phone call, every little conversation, was just another piece of evidence for me. I wasn't gathering it for a court battle. I was gathering it for my heart, for the moment I would be able to say, without doubt, I know exactly who you are when you think I have nothing. Then one Thursday evening, Daniel made his move. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating leftover soup when his car pulled up. He came in with a folder in his hand and a look on his face that made my stomach sink. "Mom," he said, "we've been talking. Chris and I think you should move in with him. He's got the space, and it would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone." I knew exactly what that meant. It would free up my house for Daniel's grand renovation plans and give Christopher the perfect chance to keep a closer eye on whatever funds I supposedly had left. I set my spoon down and folded my hands in my lap. "You've been talking? Without me?" Daniel waved a hand. "Don't take it the wrong way. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of. The same phrase they'd been using for weeks, like I was a dog they were arranging to kennel. "I see," I said quietly. "And what if I don't want to move?" Daniel smiled in that way people do when they think they're talking to someone who's already beaten. "We've already spoken to the agent. The sale will close soon. You'll have enough to rent something nice, maybe even travel. We'll handle everything else." I leaned back in my chair, pretending to think it over. In truth, my decision had been made weeks ago. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The next morning, I called Peter. "It's time," I said. "Draw up the transfer documents. All of it, the shares, the house, the trust. I want it sealed tight." Peter's voice was calm, but I could hear the note of anticipation. "And where will it all go?" I smiled into the receiver. "Somewhere they can't touch it. And to someone who's actually been there for me." Over the next week, we worked in complete secrecy. The shares were moved to a private trust with a beneficiary they didn't know existed. The deed was secured under my LLC. My accounts were shifted. By the time we were done, even if Daniel and Christopher somehow got hold of my will, they would find nothing with their names on it. And that's when I decided to have a little fun. I invited both of them over for dinner. I cooked their favorites, roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, and set the table with the good china. The last time I'd done that was nearly a decade ago. When they arrived, they were all smiles, but I could see the calculation in their eyes. They were expecting an announcement, something about the sale closing or my moving date. We ate, we made small talk, and then as we finished dessert, I said it. "I've made some decisions about my future." Daniel leaned forward instantly. Christopher's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "I won't be moving in with either of you," I said, my tone steady. "And as for the house and the shares, they're no longer my concern. I've handled everything." Christopher frowned. "What do you mean, handled everything? Handled how?" I sipped my tea before answering. "Let's just say they're out of my hands now. Permanently." The look they exchanged was a mixture of panic and suspicion. Daniel tried to keep his voice light. "Mom, you can't just—" "Oh, I can," I interrupted. "And I have." They pressed for details, but I gave them nothing. I simply smiled, cleared the plates, and changed the subject. That night, I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. Off balance, unsure, and desperate for answers. What I didn't know was that in their desperation, they were about to make a move so brazen, so reckless it would cross a line they could never uncross. 2 days after that dinner, the storm came. It was a Saturday morning, and I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Two cars pulled into my driveway, Daniel's shiny black SUV and Christopher's silver sedan. Both doors slammed in unison. I saw them through the lace curtains, walking quickly toward my front door with their shoulders squared and faces tight. They didn't knock. Daniel opened the door and stepped in like a man arriving to close a deal. Christopher followed, holding a folder under his arm. The tension in the room felt like static before a lightning strike. "We need to talk," Daniel said flatly. I put down the dish towel. "Good morning to you, too." Christopher didn't bother with small talk. "We've been thinking. The decisions you've made recently, they don't make sense. We're worried someone is taking advantage of you." I tilted my head. "And what makes you think that?" Daniel's voice rose a little. "Because you're acting irrationally, selling assets for less than they're worth, moving things around without telling us. You're not thinking clearly, Mom." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just thinking differently." That's when Christopher put the folder down on the table and slid it toward me. "This is a power of attorney document. If you sign it, we can make sure no one tricks you. We can manage your finances properly." There it was. The play. The grab for control. They thought they'd found the polite, legal way to take over everything I had. I didn't even touch the folder. "And what if I don't sign it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we can't protect you. And I don't know what kind of mess you'll end up in. You could lose everything." I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded in my lap. "And if I've already lost everything, what then?" Christopher glanced at Daniel. "That's not possible. Not if you—" "I already told you." I interrupted. "The assets are gone. Out of my hands. You can stop circling like vultures." The silence that followed was thick, hot, and ugly. Daniel finally broke it. "If you've done something foolish, don't expect us to clean it up." I stood, my voice calm but edged with steel. "Boys, let me make something perfectly clear. I don't need cleaning up. And I don't need you to manage my life." They exchanged another look, that silent, sibling communication that's as fast as lightning. I knew exactly what it meant. They were going to find another way in. Sure enough, 2 nights later, I caught them in the act. I'd been upstairs reading when I heard a faint noise downstairs, like a door clicking shut. When I came down quietly, there they were in my study, rifling through the filing cabinet. Christopher froze when he saw me. Daniel, to his credit, didn't even look ashamed. "We're just trying to make sure you're not hiding anything that could hurt you." I crossed my arms. "Get out. Now." They didn't move. That's when I said it, slowly and clearly, so there would be no mistaking me. "Everything I own is already where it belongs. And where it's going, neither of you will ever reach it." They left, but not before Daniel muttered, "You'll regret this, Mom." I locked the door behind them and stood there in the quiet, my heart pounding. Regret?
No.
I wasn't the one headed for it. Peter called the next morning with news that made me smile for the first time in days. The final paperwork on the trust had gone through. Everything, the shares, the house, even my savings, was now under ironclad legal protection. The only way Daniel and Christopher could ever touch it was if I gave it to them outright. And that was never going to happen. But my plan wasn't finished yet, because it wasn't enough to keep the money from them. I wanted them to see exactly what they'd thrown away. I wanted them to feel it. So I began arranging something public, something undeniable, something they couldn't twist into their own version of events. And when it was done, the look on their faces would be worth every lonely dinner and every silent phone. For months, I had been the quiet old woman they thought they could manage. I'd let them think they were in control, that they were closing in on whatever scraps I supposedly had left. But the time had come to let the mask slip, not privately, but in the one place they couldn't manipulate the story. A community event. Every spring, our small town held a charity auction at the old Civic Hall, a mix of donated items, services, and sometimes even property.
The whole town came out.
And that's where I decided to make my move. Peter helped me prepare the documents. Nothing about the trust itself, but a statement confirming my recent donation to the Community Scholarship Fund.
Not a small donation.
A staggering one. A figure so large it would dominate every conversation in the room. The morning of the event, I dressed in my best navy dress, the one with pearl buttons I'd kept for weddings and important church Sundays. When I arrived at the Civic Hall, the air buzzed with chatter, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls curling through the space. I saw Daniel first. He was leaning against the refreshment table, laughing with someone from the town council. Christopher was nearby, his phone in his hand, as always. They hadn't noticed me yet. The auctioneer, a cheery man named Greg, tapped the microphone to get everyone's attention. Before we start today's event, we have an announcement from one of our most beloved residents. Every head turned, and there I was, walking up to the microphone with my envelope in hand. "Good afternoon," I began. "For those who don't know me, I'm Margaret Hale. I've lived here for more than 40 years, and this town has been my home through the best and worst days of my life. Today, I want to give something back." I handed the envelope to Greg. He opened it, scanned the page, and his eyes widened before he read aloud. "It is with great pleasure that I announce a $5 million donation from Mrs. Margaret Hale to the Hale Turner Scholarship Fund, ensuring full college tuition for every qualifying student in our county for the next 10 years. The crowd gasped. Applause broke out, loud and sustained. Some people even stood to clap. Daniel's face drained of color. Christopher's phone slipped slightly in his hand. I smiled warmly at the audience. This money comes from assets I have managed for decades. It's my way of honoring my late husband, who believed education was the surest path to dignity. And I want everyone to know, I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Every penny of this donation is exactly where I want it to be." The applause swelled again, but I wasn't watching the crowd anymore. I was watching my sons. Daniel's smile was a thin, brittle thing that didn't reach his eyes. Christopher's jaw was clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. After the announcement, people swarmed me with hugs and thank yous. A few even had tears in their eyes. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw my sons slipping out of the side door. They didn't congratulate me. They didn't even look my way. I let them go. I knew where this was heading. That evening, both of them showed up at my house, uninvited again. The minute I opened the door, Daniel started. "What was that today? $5 million? Are you out of your mind?" Christopher's voice was sharper. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've given away our—" He caught himself, but the word hung there, heavy and poisonous. "Your what?" I asked quietly. "Your money? I wasn't aware it belonged to you." They fell silent, the truth too raw to say out loud. I stepped back and gestured toward the door. "I think you should leave. And next time you decide to speak to me, make sure it's about me, not what you think you can take from me." They didn't move at first, but my steady gaze made them. The door shut behind them with a final, satisfying click. As I leaned against it, I felt the weight in my chest lighten just a little. The public knew now. The town knew. And my sons knew exactly how far I was willing to go. But I wasn't done yet. Because my final move, the one I'd been holding in reserve, would take away their last illusion of control. And when that day came, they wouldn't just be too late. They would understand, once and for all, that they had lost me completely. The morning after the charity auction, the phone calls started. Not from Daniel or Christopher. They had gone quiet again, but from friends, neighbors, even a few strangers thanking me for what I'd done. Every voice was warm, full of gratitude. It made the silence from my sons even louder. By the third day, I knew they weren't going to call. Not to say they were proud, not to ask why I'd done it, not even to fake politeness. They were waiting, watching, biding their time for the next opportunity to get close enough to grab what they thought was still left. It was time to take that possibility away for good. I called Peter. "Let's finish it." He didn't need me to explain. Within hours, we were sitting in his office with a fresh stack of papers, the revised will, the updated trust directives, the final property titles. My estate, my accounts, my shares, my home, every piece of it was now legally set to pass to a select group of beneficiaries who had earned my trust through years of kindness. The biggest share would go to the scholarship fund. The rest to charities I'd supported quietly for decades, and to two people who had been constants in my life when my own children had drifted away, my goddaughter, Emily, and my neighbor, Ruth, who had once shoveled my walkway in a blizzard without being asked. Daniel and Christopher's names were gone.
Completely.
When the last signature was in place, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Peter slid the documents into his safe. "Margaret, are you ready for them to find out?" "Oh, I want them to find out," I said. "And I want them to hear it from me." So I called them, one at a time. Daniel picked up after 3 rings. "Mom," he said, his voice careful, "I've been meaning to call. I updated my will today," I said, cutting him off. "Neither of you are in it." There was a stunned pause. "You're joking." "No," I said. "I've left everything to people who care about me for who I am, not what I have. Consider this my way of making sure you never have to handle anything for me again." His voice hardened. "You'll regret this." "No, Daniel," I said softly. "I regret letting it get this far." I hung up before he could answer. Christopher's call went almost the same way. He tried to argue, to say I was being manipulated, to claim that I'd misunderstood their intentions. But when I asked him for one example of the last time he'd called to see how I was without needing anything, he went silent.
"That's what I thought," I said.
"Goodbye, Christopher." That night, I sat by the fire with a cup of tea, the house quiet except for the crackle of the logs. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing for them, the sleepless nights, the endless worry, the way I defended them even when they didn't deserve it. And I thought about the last few months, the games, the greed, the way they'd looked right through me as if I were nothing but a key to a vault. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was free. The next morning, the local paper ran a front-page story about the scholarship fund. My photograph was there, smiling in my navy dress. The headline read, "Margaret Hale leaves lasting legacy to community." Daniel and Christopher's silence after that was total. No calls. No visits. And that's when I realized they hadn't just lost the money. They'd lost me. By the time they tried to reach out again, it would be too late. Because some doors, once closed, never open again. It didn't take long before the silence broke. 3 weeks after the will was updated, I woke to pounding on my door. The sun had barely risen, and the frost was still clinging to the edges of the windows. It was Daniel. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "You can't just cut us out like that." I stood in the doorway, blocking his way. "I can, and I have." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Listen, I get it. We haven't been perfect sons. But you can't tell me you'd rather give millions to strangers than your own flesh and blood." I met his eyes. "Flesh and blood isn't enough, Daniel. Love, respect, care, those matter more. And you've shown me none of those in years." His voice cracked into anger. "This is about punishing us." "No," I said softly. "It's about protecting myself." He left without another word, but I could see the rage in his shoulders as he walked to his car. That afternoon, Christopher called. His approach was slicker, his tone almost apologetic. "Mom, I think you've misunderstood our intentions. We just wanted to help. Maybe we said things the wrong way." I didn't let him finish. "Christopher, you and your brother weren't trying to help. You were trying to control me. And if the money is all you care about, then there's nothing left for us to talk about." For the next month, I heard nothing from either of them. The space was strange, quiet but peaceful. I filled my days with people who made me feel seen, lunches with Ruth, reading sessions at the library, visits from Emily. Then one evening, a letter arrived. It was from Daniel's lawyer. They were contesting my will. I sat by the fire, reading the pages, and felt nothing. No fear, no panic, just a steady calm. Because Peter had already made sure the trust was bulletproof. Still, it was telling. Even at the end, my sons couldn't bring themselves to come to me as men and speak from the heart. They were sending lawyers. I called Peter the next morning. "They're making their move," I said. "Then it's time for yours," he replied. And that's when we decided the final meeting wouldn't be in court. It would be face-to-face. We met at Peter's office. Neutral ground. Daniel arrived first, his suit sharp, his expression sharper. Christopher followed, carrying a leather briefcase like he was walking into a business negotiation. They didn't greet me. Peter welcomed us in and closed the door. Margaret has asked to speak with you both directly before we move forward. I turned to face them. I want you to understand something. Every decision I've made, moving the assets, updating the will, was not about hurting you. It was about forcing you to see me as more than a wallet. Daniel scoffed. You've made your point. No, I said, my voice steady. I haven't. Because if I had, you'd be here apologizing. You'd be here asking how I am, not demanding what you think you're owed. Christopher leaned forward. We are your sons. That should mean something. It does, I said quietly. It means I raised you. It means I loved you. But it doesn't mean I have to reward greed. Daniel's jaw clenched. So that's it? You're cutting us out completely? Yes, I said. And not because I stopped loving you, but because you stopped loving me. The room went silent. I could see it in their eyes, the flicker of realization, the smallest crack in their armor. But it was too late. Peter slid an envelope across the table to each of them. These are copies of Margaret's final directives. They are legally binding and irreversible. Daniel didn't open his. Christopher did, his eyes scanning the first page before he pushed it back toward Peter. This is a mistake. No, I said. It's my freedom. I stood, smoothed my cardigan, and looked at them both one last time. You'll be fine.
You always have been.
Just not at my expense anymore. Then I walked out, the weight of years of hurt lifting with every step. Outside, the air was cool and bright. I took a deep breath and felt something I hadn't in years. Complete peace. I wasn't just free of their control. I was free of the hope that they might someday be the sons I'd imagined. The world could have its opinions. The gossip might swirl. But I knew the truth. I had done what was necessary to protect my heart, my dignity, and my legacy. And as for Daniel and Christopher, by the time they realized they'd lost more than money, they were already too late.